your side.
My name is Olivia, and for 6 years, I was the wife of Thomas, the seller to the sprawling empire of Sterling Properties, a Texas-based real estate dynasty that shaped the skylines of Dallas and Houston. Our marriage wasn't the stuff of fairy tales, though it might have looked that way from the outside. I met Thomas at a charity gala in a dimly lit ballroom, where I was balancing trays of champagne flutes to scrape together tuition for community college. He was tall, polished, with a smile that could disarm anyone, and he carried the effortless confidence of a man who'd never known hunger or want. I, on the other hand, grew up in a cramped Houston apartment where my mother's sewing machine hummed late into the night to keep us afloat. When Thomas proposed after a whirlwind courtship, I thought I'd stumbled into a new life, one where struggle was a distant memory. I was wrong. I'd only traded one kind of hardship for another, a gilded cage with invisible bars. We lived in the Sterling family mansion, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Dallas. All gleaming marble and manicured lawns. It was Thomas's mother, Eleanor, who ruled the house. A widow of 15 years, Eleanor was the epitome of Southern aristocracy, elegant, poised, and utterly ruthless. Her late husband, Richard, had built Sterling Properties from a single plot of land into a juggernaut, and Eleanor guarded that legacy with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. To her, I was an interloper, a nobody from nowhere who dared to marry her golden son. She never let me forget it. At family dinners, her sharp comments about my humble origins cut like knives. Olivia, dear, do they even have etiquette classes in those public schools? She'd say, her smile as cold as the crystal chandelier above us. Thomas would laugh it off, squeezing my hand under the table. But his silence spoke louder than her barbs. I endured it, believing love meant sacrifice. I told myself I could win her over. That time would soften her edges. I was naive. The unraveling of my world began at the gala celebrating the 50th anniversary of Sterling Properties. It was a glittering affair, held in a downtown Dallas hotel where chandeliers sparkled like stars and the air smelled of money. The guest list read like a who's who of Texas elite politicians, all barons, and real estate moguls, all gathered to toast the Sterling legacy. Eleanor, in a rare moment of what I thought was trust, assigned me a task of monumental importance: to take the family's prized heirloom, a diamond necklace that had been in the Sterling family for 4 generations, to a trusted jeweler for appraisal before it was displayed at the gala. The necklace, a cascade of flawless diamonds set in platinum, was more than jewelry. It was a symbol of the Sterling name, worn by every matriarch at significant family events. Eleanor's decision to entrust it to me felt like a test, a chance to prove I belonged. I accepted it with a mix of pride and dread. I handled the task with meticulous care. I drove the necklace to the jeweler myself, watched as they examined it under bright lights, and collected it the next morning, sealed in its velvet box. I returned it to the mansion's secure vault, double-checking the locks. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. At the gala, as Eleanor prepared to unveil the necklace to a hushed crowd, the appraiser's report came back. The diamonds were cubic zirconia. The necklace was a fake. The room seemed to tilt. Eleanor's face turned ashen, then crimson. Her voice, when she spoke, was a low hiss that carried across the silent ballroom. Olivia, she said, how could you? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Guests whispered, their eyes darting to me. I stammered, insisting I'd done nothing wrong, that I'd followed every step. But Eleanor was relentless. You were the last one with it, she said. You've disgraced us. The worst part wasn't her words, it was Thomas, my husband, the man who'd vowed to stand by me, stood motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding mine. When he finally spoke, it was to ask, Olivia, how could you be so careless? Careless, not even a direct accusation, but enough to twist the knife. The room closed in, and I felt like I was drowning. Eleanor demanded I leave the mansion that night to avoid further tarnishing the family name. Humiliated, I packed a single suitcase, my hands shaking as I folded clothes I'd once thought would make me fit into their world. Thomas didn't stop me. He didn't even look at me as I walked out the door. The weight of their judgment pressing on my chest, I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town. The kind with flickering neon signs and threadbare carpets. Alone, in that dingy room, I replayed the events obsessively. The necklace had been real when I took it to the jeweler. I'd seen the appraiser's initial report. Someone had switched it after I returned it to the vault. But who and why? A spark of defiance flickered in me. I wasn't a thief, and I wasn't going to let them paint me as one. The mansion had security cameras in every hallway, including the one outside the vault. If I could get access to the footage, I could prove my innocence, but I had no authority to demand it, and Eleanor would never cooperate. I needed help. I called Marcus, a friend from my college days who'd always been a wizard with computers. He worked freelance now, recovering data for small businesses and the occasional shitty client. Over coffee at a diner, I explained everything. Marcus leaned back, chewing on a straw. Sounds like a setup, he said. Give me a few days and some cash, and I'll get you that footage. It took Marcus 3 days and $500 money I scraped together from my dwindling savings, but he came through. The footage he recovered was a revelation. The last person to enter the vault wasn't me. It was Thomas, accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize. They'd been in there for 10 minutes, long enough to swap the necklace. Marcus dug deeper and found that the footage had been tampered with. Someone had looped an earlier segment to hide their tracks, but Marcus was better than whoever had tried to cover it up. He restored the original, and there it was, Thomas, my husband, betraying me in more ways than one. I asked Marcus to identify the woman. It didn't take long. Her name was Valerie, Thomas's college sweetheart, who'd recently returned from a decade in Europe. I remembered her vaguely from old photos Thomas kept in a box under our bed, a box he thought I didn't know about. She was stunning, with sharp cheekbones and a cool, effortless grace, the kind of woman Eleanor would have handpicked for her son, the kind of woman I could never be. My first instinct was to storm into the mansion and confront Thomas, to scream and throw the evidence in his face. But I stopped myself. Rage wouldn't win this. I needed a plan. I reached out to Mr. Hargrove, a lawyer who'd been a close friend of Thomas's late father, Richard. Hargrove was in his late 60s, semi-retired, living in a modest house in Austin. His reputation for dismantling corporate fraud was legendary, and I knew he'd have no loyalty to Eleanor or Thomas. I drove to his office, a small space cluttered with legal books and faded photos of him and Richard. Over coffee, I laid out everything: the necklace, the footage, Thomas's presence in the vault with Valerie. Hargrove listened, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. You want justice, Olivia, he said. But justice isn't loud, it's meticulous. We'll build a case, piece by piece. Hargrove became my guide, teaching me how to navigate the murky waters of corporate records without raising alarms. I spent weeks poring over bank statements, emails, and transaction logs, all accessed through back channels Hargrove provided. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Thomas hadn't just switched the necklace to frame me. He'd been siphoning money from stolen properties for years, funneling it into offshore accounts. He'd bought a beach house in Malibu, registered under Valerie's name. There were receipts for jewelry, private jet rentals, a Porsche, gifts for her, paid for with company funds. Each discovery was a fresh wound. But I didn't let myself break. I channeled my pain into precision, compiling a dossier with Hargrove's help. It was airtight, undeniable. I didn't go to the police or confront Thomas. Instead, Hargrove suggested we leak the evidence anonymously to the company's board. Let them do the dirty work, he said. Thomas will never see it coming. We sent the dossier through an untraceable email, and within days, the board launched an internal investigation. Thomas grew erratic, snapping at employees, missing meetings, his charm crumbling under pressure. He had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. Eleanor, meanwhile, was unraveling. The company's reputation was her lifeblood, and whispers of financial misconduct were poisoning it. One evening, she appeared at my apartment, her usual poise replaced by desperation. "Olivia," she said, her voice trembling, "you have to help. The company is everything." I was stunned. "Eleanor, begging me?" Then came the confession that shook me to my core. She'd known about Thomas's affair and his financial schemes. For months, she'd stayed silent to protect the Sterling name, hoping he'd fix it himself. Her admission was a crack in her armor, and I saw my opening. "I'll help," I said, but on my terms. I demanded she reinstate my share of the inheritance, which Thomas had manipulated out of his father's will years ago. Richard had intended for me to receive a significant portion of the estate, but Thomas had convinced Eleanor to rewrite the terms, claiming I wasn't ready for such responsibility. Now, I held the leverage. Eleanor hesitated, her lips pursed, but she had no choice. We signed the papers that night, with Hargrove as witness. With the inheritance secured, I played my final card. I sent the complete dossier, bank records, emails, the restored security footage to the board and the district attorney's office. Within hours, Thomas was suspended from his role as CEO. The DA filed charges for embezzlement, fraud, and theft. Valerie, sensing the noose tightening, fled to Paris, leaving Thomas to face the fallout alone. Eleanor, true to her nature, issued a public statement disowning her son, calling him a disgrace to the Sterling legacy. The board, impressed by the precision of the evidence and my discretion, appointed me as the legal representative of Thomas's forfeited assets. I sold most of it, the mansion, the cars, the vacation homes. The proceeds funded a foundation I created for women trapped in financially or emotionally abusive marriages. I named it the Eleanor Sterling Foundation, a pointed jab at my former mother-in-law's complicity. To my surprise, she didn't protest. Over time, our relationship shifted. She began to respect me, even apologized in her stiff, reluctant way. We weren't friends, but we were something else to women bound by the wreckage of the same man. Uneasy allies in a world we'd both fought to survive. Thomas tried to crawl back. He called, texted, even showed up at my apartment, his eyes red and his voice desperate. I was under pressure. He pleaded. I made a mistake. One mistake. I looked at him, the man I'd once loved, and saw only a hollow shell. "You didn't lose everything because of me," I said. "You lost it because of you." I closed the door and never looked back. Months later, I was invited to speak at a conference on financial abuse in marriage. The auditorium was packed, the audience hanging on my every word. I told my story not for pity, but for power. I ended with a line I'd rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times. I didn't fight with fire. I fought with truth. And truth burns longer. As I stepped off the stage, applause ringing in my ears, I felt lighter than I had in years. The necklace, the mansion, the Sterling name, they were gone. But I was free. Freedom, I'd learned, was worth more than all of it. I walked out into the Texas sunset, my head high, ready for whatever came next.